Hello, my name is Dana and welcome to the Orchid Hut. Today we are going to be looking at some of my Cattleya type smaller orchids, and we're going to be talking about how they're named, which is one of my least favorite subjects about orchids, and then we're going to repot two of them together. Previously, many of these smaller Cattleya type orchids were named Potinara orchids, and that meant that in their parentage they had Cattleya, Brassivola, Laelia, and or Sophronitis orchids in their background. And recently you will see that some Potinara orchids have been renamed to a name much more complicated, Rhyncholaelia Cattleya. So it is true that orchids can be very frustrating as far as naming goes. Names are constantly being changed, regrouped, reclassified, and sometimes you can even have orchids tagged one way and then you find out that they're really not even named that anymore. So this might be the case with my Potinaras, but I'm going to share them with you anyway. The reason that I grow these is because they are small, and they get to blooming size when they're still rather small. They prefer intermediate temperatures, so I grow mine in the house, but they like bright light, which I can provide through the eastern exposure of my bay window. So they grow well for me in the house, and they do not require a lot of space or unusual care. They do like to be saturated with water, but then they like to dry out. They are planted in typical Cattleya type bark for me, and that works well. This one we're going to look at first. I repotted this one about maybe a month and a half ago. This one is Potinara Audrey Hartman, and it was a cross between another Potinara named Samantha Duncan and then a Sophronitis orchid. Okay, and let's just look and see how it's doing. So there's some new root growth right here. More new root growth right there. And there's a root curling around the upper part of the pot right there. So this one has developed a bit more of a root system since I've repotted it, and that's what you're looking for. This one is going to be blooming size next year, I believe, so they don't have to be super large before they start blooming. Okay, let's look at another one. We're going to be repotting this one today. This one is Potinara Hawaiian Charisma, and I'm sure that if I were to do a little bit of research on this, I could figure out the parent orchids that were hybridized to create this one. But most of them require similar type conditions. This one came from the grower in bark, but I'm noticing that it's getting a little soft, so that's why I want to repot it. Also, you might be able to notice right here that it does have some new root growth, so I want to get that in a little bit closer to the bark. So we'll be repotting this one in just a second. And then this one is kind of a cousin, I think, to Potinara, at least in my view of the orchid world. This one is a BLC, which is a Brassivola Cattleya Hawaiian Leopard Mei Ling. And this one could probably also be researched to see how this was developed, but it's probably Brassivola, Laelia, Cattleya, some type of intergeneric hybrid like that. Okay, so let's take a look at this one, see if it's a good candidate for being repotted. And this one suffered just a little bit. It's been adjusting to my environment for a number of months now, and it was shipped to me with a new growth that kind of blasted back, which was probably its way of protesting an environment change or having been shipped, but now you can see down towards the bottom it is putting on another new growth, which means new roots hopefully, and so now might be a good time to repot it. So I'm going to get these out of the bark that they were shipped in, and it'll be kind of a quick repot because these are not large orchids. I'm not expecting to have to do much to the root system. So I'll be back in just a bit with the media and the pots. Okay, so back with all of the things that we need to repot these two little orchids. Let me show you the media first. This is pretty much standard Cattleya type mix for me. It is pre-mixed this way with sort of medium bark, some sponge rock, a little bit of charcoal, and some mica. So I just use this as is. I don't really change it. And I have these little pots. Now, some small cactus came potted in these originally, and I'm just reusing them because I do not have any clear pots that are small enough for these two orchids. So it's a little bit of a disadvantage because I won't be able to see what the roots are doing. However, these pots are small enough that I think you know, I won't have to worry so much about the interior of the media being wet because the pots are so small. So I think it will work out and be fine even though they're not clear or opaque. All right, so let's start with the Hawaiian Charisma. I'll put a picture of the bloom up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Maybe one of these days I will have a bloom picture of my own to share. And it's a good thing I'm doing this. These roots are not in the best shape. Lots of dead roots here. Okay. So there's more trimming to be done here than I imagined. There's really 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 viable roots here, and then 2 little new roots that are starting. So I really need to make sure that those 2 roots can do well. Okay, I'm gonna go over to the sink and give this a quick rinse, flame my cutters, and then we'll trim the roots on this orchid. And I rinsed the roots, and we're just going to go ahead and start trimming off the obvious dead pieces. You know, sometimes when you look at the upper part of an orchid, it can be a bit deceiving. Sometimes the root system beneath the pot is in really poor shape, but the orchid is trying to put on a show and make you think that it's healthier than it is. So repotting is truly one of the best ways to see the health of your orchid because the root system tells it all. The plant eventually will not be healthy if the root system is poor. The plant will not bloom, most likely, if the root system is poor. Or rather, the orchid may try to bloom, but it's not a good idea for it to bloom because that will just further weaken a plant that has a poor root system. So I really do like to focus on having good roots first. Oh look, that's so dead. There's just the thread left. I really do try to work on having a good root system first. And if you can accomplish that, then the rest of the good things that the orchid can do will follow. This one, just a little bit questionable. Okay, so these are still firm. Trim the end of this. The this one is not. I have to do that very carefully so I don't damage those two new roots. Okay, so this is in pretty good shape now. I think because some of these roots were in poor shape, I think I will go ahead and spray this one with some hydrogen peroxide. And we'll give that just a few seconds to dry. In the meantime, I will put some of the bark in the very bottom of this pot. About like that. Let's kind of check for height here. And that looks pretty good to get those new roots a bit closer to the medium. I just posted a short video a second ago. The weather has turned really stormy and wet here in southeast Texas, and so temperatures are still warm, but it's pouring down rain. All of my outside orchids are drenched, which is not necessarily bad, but on Saturday we will have temperatures that drop into the mid-50s. That's Fahrenheit. And so that's a little too cold for outside orchids, so I have started bringing them into the garage today so that they have a little bit of a chance to dry out from the rain before that cold weather hits in 2 days. Strange weather we have here. Okay, so now, let me just move that one piece of bark. The two new little roots that are happening right there, and it looks like there might even be a new growth right there, will be much closer to the media and will have an opportunity to establish themselves. Now, I will water that really, really well, and we'll see how that's doing in a few weeks. Let's put the tag back. Potinara, Hawaiian Charisma. Okay, let me get this cleaned up and then we'll do the second one. Okay, second little orchid. Off camera, I reflamed the cutters because I'm moving to a different plant now. And let's see what we have in here. This is BLC Hawaiian Leopard Mei Ling. Okay, now this one seems to have a very similar situation to the previous orchid. There's a few roots in good shape and a few not so. So let me give this a quick rinse. And we'll trim it up. Right here, there's like some very sort of weak leaves here. It's kind of like they grew, but they didn't. Maybe that was the original seedling, and that's why they're so small. even when the orchid roots do not need all that much rinsing under the sink, I still prefer to do it because I think it makes the roots just the tiniest bit more flexible. And so as you're manipulating them here, they are not quite as prone to snap. At least that's my experience. Okay. I don't think that's going to really do much for the plant anymore. Let's see about this one. This one is still connected a bit better. I think I'll leave that one because otherwise it's just a two-leafed plant. There is new growth happening right here. And so hopefully there will be some new root development beyond that. All right, let's give this a quick spray. Now, there is a little bit of a disadvantage. If the roots are wet, you're not exactly spraying with 3% hydrogen peroxide anymore. The wetness on the roots will sort of dilute the hydrogen peroxide. And if it's a plant that I think just really needs the hydrogen peroxide, I will let the roots dry from being rinsed before I spray the plant. But I didn't really see that it was necessary in this case. Okay, a little bit of media in the bottom. Let's kind of check for depth here. That looks pretty good. Now, believe it or not, I actually have this bark nearby. It needs just a little bit more. You know, usually I'm having to cut the camera and go make a trip to the garage to get that extra media I never seem to have. Maybe just a little bit more. Okay, and that should about do it. Let's get the tag back in. I will give this orchid a nice drink to settle and let the media be a little bit moist, and we'll check on this one in a few weeks, see how it's doing. Okay, so if you learned something new or liked this video, please hit the like button. The subscribe button will be in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thanks for watching. See you next time. If you are an Instagram user, I have recently started a page there for the Orchid Hut. I would love for you to follow me. You can find me under the same name as this YouTube channel, the Orchid Hut. I post almost daily pictures of my orchid photography as well as some of my short videos. So I hope you can find me there and follow my page. See you soon.